Oops, it's not full screen. Maybe I should fix that first. I've tried a new tool for this new presenting tool, and so now you have to bear with me, and there are technical difficulties already. Nice. The clicker doesn't work. It's not full screen. Come on. It's okay. Yeah, it's strange to be here 10 years later. It feels like it has been yesterday and 100 years ago at the same time, and I can't really figure out which one is it. Yeah, let me get started. My grandma used to say that our life is like a carriage, and when we are born with a single horse drawing that carriage. And that for every decade, a new horse is being added, and the carriage goes faster and faster. And in a typical grandma move, she told me this as a kid, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I had no idea what she meant. But long after she passed away, I keep coming back to this. I just keep thinking of it from now and then, every now and then. And according to her, since we last met here in 2013, all our carriages got upgraded with another horse. I don't know about you, but I definitely feel like mine is getting faster and faster. And we were asked to look back at the last 10 years. I want to go back a bit further at 20 years ago. And let's just pretend that my life as a web developer started in 2003, which is not entirely accurate. It was somewhere in 2002, as far as I remember, but I guess it counts. So I got into web development by an accident. I wasn't meant to be a web developer. I was one of those kids who weren't into computers. I was into guitars, and I was into drawing and into artsy stuff. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to be. I was thinking about becoming a filmmaker maybe, or study design. And so I didn't think about the web back then. But my band asked me if I could build their website. And I thought, yeah, I could give it a try. Let's see, how hard can it be? And I got into Dreamweaver first, and then HTML and CSS later, and then JavaScript followed, and PHP followed. And something happened that I didn't really expect, because I was thinking for myself that this is not my thing. But I actually found this huge open space that felt way more creative and way more exciting than I ever thought. And learning HTML and CSS and JavaScript and PHP didn't really feel like learning something that I now need because it's like some task. It was just a really exciting opportunity. And it kept on giving and kept on giving. So other bands came, and I built more band websites, and then my first internship was built on that, and I became a web developer for the Forest Stewardship Council. And so it kept on going on like this. I just didn't have to do much about it. And I loved everything around it, and I loved how the web felt, because it was really an open and welcoming space where I, as an accidental web developer, felt like just a part of other people that got into this in the same way. There were many people sharing similar stories in the blog articles about how they found out about all those techniques that we can use now to build websites. And many of them were accidental web developers as well. And so I built, as I said, it just kept coming. I built more sites. I got my first paid jobs, and it was crazy because I suddenly had a career in an area that I really didn't expect, and I didn't really plan it to go like that. And so I was already a web developer before I even got into university. I studied design then afterwards, because I still wanted to do that. I still had that side. And my web development career financed my university years, which also was quite special to me. And then at university, I got into the startup scene and built my own first startup called Zootool back in the days, a bookmark tool. And again, I suddenly were able to do all those things that I didn't even think about before. And my professor was pretty hyped about it, and he supported me big time, and we founded a company together. So once I graduated, I already had my first company. which again blew my mind. And so all of this was super exciting. But then when I got out of university, it was roughly the time when the first clouds also started to appear. So it was at that time that I had already spent a couple years in this business, and it got clear that not everything is as perfect as it seems. So I saw a couple open source projects that I followed for a long time being abandoned because people didn't have time for it anymore. I felt other startups disappear because they got bought or had one of those famous exit stories with those nice letters, how they are now totally focused on the product and then the product is gone two weeks later. So there were obviously quite a few issues. And we ran into our own issues. Zootool was highly unsuccessful and a pain in the ass to find financial success in this. And so when I arrived here in 2013, the clouds got darker and darker around me. And at that time, as Mark said, I was talking about Snowden and the NSA. It was the time already when Facebook has become a huge thing and other platforms already became bigger and bigger. And we had to learn that this beautiful medium that I personally loved so much was heavily abused as a spying tool. And so my talk back then was about that, how Snowden came up with those revelations about the NSA and how, shit this all is. And I was very much interested in decentralization back then as a hopeful alternative for how this could all be different, how we could have a different architecture around our social media identities and could find better ways to share our data and be in control over our data. And so I had this vision how this could now look like, how we could rebuild a better web and how we could fight for our privacy. And the coming years didn't really go that well. The fight for privacy wasn't happening as I thought it would. It mostly just went on a legal base, and then it returned in the form of cookie banners that still annoy us daily, and it's like the only remainder of what is left from that fight. And so even if Facebook was no longer the main actor, other platforms followed. So it was a lot about YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and those huge machines that just followed in the footsteps. And it was more like the age of the attention economy. Those platforms spend a lot of energy to keep us engaged, keep us in the timelines, make sure that we click those buttons that they want us to click, to make us into perfect ad targets and create ad revenue on top of that. And it was also the age of influencers and content creators who built their careers around that. And not all of that has been bad, but it was just a very different web than what I had experienced when I got into it. And then it was also the decade of rising misinformation, and Jake talked about this morning how fake news became a huge problem, and social media built the perfect platform to spread those fake news and manipulate us in many ways and try to move us into certain political directions or try to get us vote in a certain way. And to turn it even a bit darker, because it's not dark enough already, then something had to follow. After the age of social media, we had to have something new. So the Web3 was invented as the next inevitable step that we now need to, I don't know, for whatever we needed. And so with blockchains and NFTs and recently AI, it got even a bit darker for me, in my opinion, and I fell out of this version of the web. I fell out of love for the web. Disenfranchised by all of this. Let me have a quick sip. But I need to rewind, because this is only just a part of the last decade for me, the dark side, so to say. Last time I stood on this stage, my son was just 1 year old. Mark said that already. And my personal version of this decade that followed was a lot more positive. So my wife and I, we upgraded to kid number 2 in the meantime. We built a house, we moved to a small city near Heidelberg, and our life is pretty great, to be honest. Our kids are now 6 and 10. The younger one just entered elementary school, and the older one just entered high school. And it blows my mind to see them grow up and just evolve into really cool human beings that we can now have honest conversations with and they share their own opinions, and it's really cool to see that. And this decade wasn't just a way more positive on this personal level for me than the dark side that I just showed. It was also really positive in my career as a web developer, because back then in 2013, I just had started a new project, which started as a side project called Kirby, a file-based content management system. And it was kind of a therapy project for me at that time, because Zootool had tanked so hard, and I felt like something new should be coming. And it was an experiment. I didn't know where this would lead. And in the last 10 years, it turned into a proper company, into a really great experience that we managed to now turn into something where we work on as 5 people together, which I absolutely love. And there's a great team behind it, and we have a super supportive community around it. So a lot of really good things happened there. So I could just totally focus on that. Oh no, I'm getting away from myself. So if I would have to give this decade a title, the title for this would be change. And change is such a scary word, because it can be so positive and yet so negative at the same time. And we have seen a lot of this as a theme from the last talks. And this ambivalence between positivity and negativity is becoming a thing. It's a red line in this, or it's not what we are saying. It's a theme in this conference as well. And this balance between the positive side and the negative side is becoming more stressful. But I also like to look at this from a more positive angle, because what we've seen in the last decade, and especially with the emerging topics like the pandemic, climate change getting worse and worse, and then now recently the wars in Ukraine and Israel, we get a chance to stop and just reflect. And I feel like this all happened by accident, but this conference is all about that, to reflect, to look back, and then take this chance. And this is a chance that we normally won't get in the same way if everything was safe and cozy and we could just keep on doing what we are doing. But it's not really safe and cozy anymore. And yet we are in a privileged situation to do that, to sit here together and have those conversations and just, think about it. And so I keep asking myself more often, where do I stand after those 20 years? Is what I'm doing still meaningful? And is the web still a solid foundation for my family, for the team, for everything that we have in mind for the future? And maybe I should rather start fresh and become a woodworker or build a hut in the woods. And it sounds funny, a bit melodramatic, but I've seen this more and more. Those questions keep coming up for more people. And I guess it's about a certain kind of age group. I feel there are a lot of people in here that kind of grew up together in this web. There are so many familiar faces in here that I saw over the years. And maybe it's a form of web midlife crisis. I have no idea. I came here by train and not by motorcycle, so maybe I'm still safe. But yeah, this is how I got to this obviously pretty ambitious and kind of ridiculous talk title. Because spoiler alert, I don't have the answer for it. I'm 42 now. Maybe that's a sign. But that's how far as it can get. But I think I found a few puzzle pieces that really matter to me in those 10 years, and I also wanted to share them. Again, this is what I feel like the other talks have all been about, finding those puzzle pieces that would then move us forward. But the first question for me that stands before anything else is do I still love what I'm doing? Because if I don't have a good answer for that, then I can definitely move to the woods instead. And whenever I sit at my desk and I finish the crappy tasks, because this is what I'm doing, I'm focusing on the things that I don't want to do first, and then I get them over with, and then I have the second half of the day free for the things I like. And the second half of the day, for me, the rewarding part is always still coding. So I still open my code editor and I still get the same kind of excitement out of it. I still feel like this huge open space of opportunities to build something, to come up with new ideas. And so I can wholeheartedly say, for me personally, hell yes, I still absolutely love it. And this was important to me because sometimes there's a certain kind of pressure built into this industry that we have to evolve somehow. So web developer is not something that you do when you're still, when you're 40 or 50, then you move on to more like leading roles or whatever. And for me, I don't feel like that. I feel more like a maker. I feel more connected to people that build something in the physical world. And so I actually really still love that. And so far, I have the impression that it also happens for us as a team, that we get into those excitement modes where we still then come up with ideas, and then often there are like those ping pong games where someone's saying, like, oh yeah, we could really turn this into this, and then there's another idea coming on top of that. And I feel like as long as we have that, this is a really good, solid foundation. But this answer is something that you all have to find for yourself. Like, do we still love this? This is what Tobias came up with. It's a pretty hard question. So where is this? But there is all this frustration with the tech scene, and I can't deny it. And what should I do with that? And sometimes I feel like I'm just a grumpy old man now, which is a bit early at 42, but well, maybe that's how it is, because the web moves so fast. We probably age faster as well, because we have to keep on top of all of this stuff. And maybe it's just me, because 10 years ago, as Mark said, I have been here talking about Snowden and the NSA, so not exactly ungrumpy as well. But I don't really feel like that. I don't think I'm grumpy by default, and I really don't want to be grumpy. I see the web as a huge candy store where we can just move around and grab whatever we want, any kind of inspiration or new tools, new frameworks, new whatever, and just get ideas from everywhere and collect them and see what works and what doesn't work for us, and combine them into a tool belt that then is just growing and getting better. And so I feel like being open for new stuff should be the default state. And it also would be kind of ironic to become a grumpy old gatekeeper that's now like, every new change that is coming from here on, no, please, no. Because, I mean, the web has been such a disruptive medium. When I fully embraced it at 20, but there were so many people like, oh my God, this web thing, I hope it doesn't stick. This is like the worst where we could go to. And so, yeah, this is like the balance between being grumpy on one hand and also open on the other hand. And I think it's not that much about grumpiness, it's more about being critical. And I think we've seen, again, quite a lot about how being critical is definitely justified. And we shouldn't just embrace everything with open arms without looking at it more closely, because, I mean, we are those who work in this industry for so long, and we have seen things, and we know about the mistakes that have been made before. So I think we also have an obligation to be critical sometimes. But how can we stay critical and yet open at the same time? And how do we find out if our criticism is justified? For me, this is all about looking at the intention of what is coming next. With lots of things, this is easy. With a lot of new hypes, it's easy. The intention is mostly, when we just think about web development, it's mostly about improving the developer experience in some way. And we can discuss if that is a good idea or not, and if this will automatically always lead to better user experiences. But with most of those hypes, it's quite easy, because if you don't like it, most times you can just wait for 5 years and then it will be over anyway. But There are more problematic parts where tech is moving forward in pretty obviously difficult ways, and it's sometimes hard to judge them. I've mentioned Bitcoin and NFTs and AI as like this big, dark, dystopian thing. And I feel like those three parts are especially tricky because the intention on first sight has been good. The idea to revolutionize the financial market or to provide a better way for artists to get paid or just reduce all the nasty tasks that we don't want to do. Those are intentions that sound pretty good to me. But we've seen how things played out then over time. And with crypto and NFTs, it got pretty quickly clear that this is not well-intentioned, that the intentions behind them are just a thin layer about what is really meant to be. But with the AI, it's more tricky because there are obviously really good cases to use it. And then it also comes with those massive issues that it has. So it has this built-in energy problem. It is making our climate crisis worse. It is attacking the art industry in a really serious way. So we have to actually think about those. And Ada said that before, that we have to be aware of what we are doing and what we are building. And even though it is happening on a much smaller scale, we also ask those questions for ourselves. With something like Kirby, it grew into something bigger than it was 10 years ago. And now we are sometimes confronted with situations where it is used in ways that we don't really like. And luckily, this is just a minority, but we are still confronted with that. And we have to be confronted with this because our tech is not apolitical. It's just not happening. And it's getting especially tricky because we feel like we have to be on top of those hypes because otherwise we would miss out and maybe not be successful anymore in 10 years from now. So there is a lot of pressure to find out what is the right thing for us. And I want to talk about the definition of success as one of those puzzle pieces. Exactly, this definition of success is one of those puzzle pieces that keeps on following me. Kirby started as a side project, and that was a beautiful state because there was no expectation behind it. But then it actually started to grow, and people liked it. And somehow the treadmill automatically started. So suddenly there were certain milestones that I were hoping for. And I was also starting to compare it with other tools or with other startups, with other content management systems, of course. And so you get into this mode where everything is like, built on competition and comparison. And I think we all know that comparison is the root for dissatisfaction. And the web is the worst place for that. Because all our success stories are always huge. They are always measured in millions and billions. So how can this be a healthy benchmark for what we aim for? And it's also highly unrealistic because just a very few of us reach those spheres. It's basically just a lottery. And yet we are embedded in the system with numeric definitions of success, and we are bound to the concept of keep on growing. If we look at numbers, those numbers need to go up somehow because otherwise it would no longer be a success afterwards. So we need more downloads or more subscribers, more sales. And this is now built into everything. And I think I only really started to understand how unhealthy all of this is during the pandemic when the definition of success suddenly seemed so insignificant. A friend of mine is a doctor at the ICU, and he often shared stories of his work with me. And those were the points where I thought, okay, this is just completely the wrong direction. Because our true definition of success in the end is all about our health, our security, and our happiness. There is no success if we can't answer those basic needs for us. And during the pandemic, my wife and I, we really tried hard to keep our kids happy because they have been living in this isolated state then for a while, and we tried everything to just keep them entertained and not let them be affected by this. And then you suddenly think, yeah, that is a way more important definition of success. And it showed me that it is a lot about our internal factors that define success and not so much about the external ones. And it's really hard to translate that into action. And I saw for myself that as soon as some sort of daily routine came back, the same mistakes happened again. I still keep comparing myself with others. I still keep comparing Kirby with others. With others, and that's a problem, because you need to learn that not to do that. I find it helpful that we as a team kind of often remind ourselves from that when we are in our conversations about this. And I also think that we got better at defining success differently for us by focusing on the things that we can actually do to keep Kirby growing, not in terms of sales, but in terms of what it does. So to focus on the task list that we basically get from our community, to focus on solving issues and focus on implementing features. And then this form of success is easily measurable because we get feedback out of that. And to me, that feels a lot more sustainable. And this is probably the key part of it, because when we are in this game for the long run, then we need some form of sustainability for our definitions of success, in this case, for the next years to come. And I also realized that my own definition of success is shifting more and more to how I manage to spend my time. I started this talk with the analogy of my grandma about the carriage. And I didn't think so much about this in the first 10 years, but I definitely think a lot about it in the last 10 years. And especially with kids, it is becoming more obvious. I think when a decade adds another horse, then a kid adds like 10 horses or something. And my wife and I, we sometimes really wish for a pause button that we could just press and enjoy some special moments a bit longer, or whenever we feel like there are those moments when you come downstairs and then your kid seems like it has grown 2 meters overnight, and then you were just like, oh, please let me pause this. This is going way too fast. And it's a cliche, but it's true. Time is our most valuable currency. I'm grateful that we found a model as a company to work together in a way that does not measure time. And that sounds a bit like anarchy, but we don't have any time tracking or any regulations around time. We also don't have any holiday plans or numbers of days that we can take off. And the system is ultimately built on trust. And it has its own challenges. I don't want to sell it as something that is totally perfect, but it also comes with a built-in freedom that I absolutely love. And I'm not sure how scalable this is. I don't know if it would work with 10 people. I don't know if it would work with a different group of people. So I'm not standing here and saying you should all commit to that, but it is something that I realize for myself. As soon as we try to find better ways for ourselves, it is actually possible. And I think it is also connected to what I love so much about the web, because there have always been those ideas to do things differently. And sometimes they might fit and sometimes they might not fit. It's also a theme of the conferences I went to, Marx Beyond Tellerrand conferences in the last years, or Border None, where people often showed that there are different options to create your own perfect space. And the freedom to define our own time when we are most productive or most motivated also seems like a great way to be more accepting of our weak spots. Because this is another of those puzzle pieces. For a long time, I felt like I need to optimize myself more. I need to be better at my tasks. I need to find better processes and better tools to handle them. That started already as a freelancer, but it got worse with Kirby because then suddenly I felt like pushed into this situation where I'm now the one who owns the company before we switched to a different company model. But that was like a situation that I didn't feel really comfortable about because after all, I just want to build things with the others. I don't really want to care about this at all. And it's this typical thing also on the web where we see all those folks who totally have it under control and they stand up at 4 o'clock and then they do yoga and answer 20 emails and then they make breakfast for their kids. And it's like, it couldn't be further from my reality than it's just not working for me. So at some point, I just had to start to accept that this is not what I am. I think more of my own life in waves, in those wave patterns. And sometimes I feel very productive for a very long time, and everything is just easy and goes smoothly. And then I sometimes really feel really shitty, and nothing really works. And though it's not just about my waves, it's also about waves in relationships or waves with your team, because sometimes those waves align and we all are super productive and super on top of everything together, and sometimes it just doesn't work like that. And that's okay, in my opinion. And the more we get accepting of that, the easier it gets, because this is also something that I learned for myself. The harder I try to push, the worse it gets. And I'm so happy about the talks that we've seen today. I'm really honestly happy, because I still feel it's hard to talk about those things. And I already loved Emily's talk at Mark's conference, Emily Anhalt's talk at Beyond Tellerrand this year. She was in Düsseldorf and also in Berlin. And you should really watch it if you haven't seen it. She's a psychologist, and she has been talking about this mental health in the work environment. And I think it's such a huge topic, because we live in those really uncozy times, and we need to deal with those things. So it's a lot about honesty, and we have seen this. People have been super honest today, and I appreciate it so much, because I believe that honesty is a superpower, not just for ourselves, also for our teams, not just for how we communicate with each other, but also how we communicate with our communities. And in the social media world, quite the opposite is happening. We see all those, we have all those platforms, and on each platform we play certain roles. So for example, on LinkedIn, we are all super professional, and we promote our skills and our companies and our products, because obviously there's this built-in search for new employers and new employees. And then on Instagram, we pretend that we are super honest and let everybody into our private lives. And it's just our true self. But on every picture, we are smiling. And then people occasionally shove in a couple product placements because to sell a few things here and there. That's also handy. And then we have the dark side of social media in Twitter threads or in other places where people just keep on shouting at each other and try really hard to push their opinion through. And what I see as a huge problem to get connected with this is those roles have become so standard. It's just what we see every day. And social media has become like a digital twin of our social lives. And by this, those roles keep on seeping into our reality. And this is how we start to see people and actually feel like about people. And this is, in my opinion, it's really a huge problem. And when I entered the web, it felt completely different. There was a certain kind of honesty built into everything, because people were just figuring out how this all works. And there was a lot of just openly admitting that we don't know everything, and people would just write their blog articles, and everyone had their own style. And this professionalism wasn't already there yet. And I liked that a lot more, to be honest. And it's the same with these conferences, where we still have kind of a place to keep this kind of honesty. I came back here and I saw so many people today that I've seen over the last 10 years over and over again. And it's like those it's not yet a friendship, but it's you meet them and continually, and it's just this warm, fuzzy feeling inside to see them again. It's just awesome. And I think that a lot of people are longing to find those places again where we can just be who we are and be honest. I'm happy that it seems to me, at least, it's my perspective on this, that we managed to have still a protective bubble for our community where this is happening. But it is also very closely connected to how we communicate there. And it's not like something that we intended to do. It just happened because Kirby turned from a personal project into a company, but we never really treated it like that. So we just kept on talking like we would be talking and not think about how we want to seem there. So we still talk about what we want to say in general, but then when we say it, we are very open. That's at least my impression. So we talk about pricing models and design decisions and features and things that make us very, very much attackable. And I guess that's the scary part about it, because of course it could backfire. If you put your honest self out there, it is risky and it could be abused, and someone could just, misinterpret that in a really bad way. But so far, I felt like it has only brought us good experiences, and it only brought us closer to those in our community, and I feel like I understand them better in many ways. And we have great conversations. Sometimes they derail a bit, and we have to put them back on track. But most of the times, it's just great. So after all, I would like to keep Kirby running as a long-term project for the next 10 years. And so I really think that this form of honesty is something that we need for that. Because on a short term, you don't have to think about those things. But the longer a project goes, or the longer you want to be like working together as a team, I think the more important such puzzle pieces become. And my last puzzle piece would be our definition of quality. Again, whenever I sit at Beyond Tellerrand, there's some amazing artist and they show their brilliant murals or like really nicely printed stuff and books that they made. And I always come home and then I open my code editor and I think like, it doesn't look like that. There is a problem built into our digital products because they are not physical, and as such, they are not even just physical. They are also not. They are often just temporary. So Kirby looked completely different 10 years ago, and it will look completely different in 10 years from now. And so when we take a screenshot, it's just a very two-dimensional representation of that, and it misses out so many different layers to it, and it also is just valid for, I don't know, a couple of weeks until we change something again. So it's really hard to appreciate this sometimes, and also define or see where the quality is. And I want to explain this a bit better. If you think about a physical object, the definitions of quality are a lot more obvious. So for example, you could probably all go mentally through your house, and then you would find a couple objects where you instantly say, okay, I'm really attached to those. Even emotionally. For me, this would be my guitars, where I would probably try to rescue them in case of a fire after the living beings are all out of the house. But I'm really closely attached to those, and the quality in them is quite obvious. So it's about the build quality, how they have been crafted, the attention to detail, how much they weigh, how they feel, maybe even how they smell sometimes for some objects. So there are a lot of quality layers that are pretty obvious when you think about physical objects. And then there are also layers beneath that. So we have, for example, the longevity of something. How long has this already been in your possession? Is it still working? There's a certain kind of trust related to that. Do I still get spare parts for it, for example, if it breaks? And then there's the emotional level. Like how closely what is the story behind it? Who gave me this object? What did I experience with this object? For my guitars, they instantly transform me back into my into my bedroom as a teenager, and where I sat and practiced. And it also takes me back to the stages where I played guitar with my band. And so there is a story built into those objects. And with our digital projects or our digital objects, there are also certain quality levels that are more obvious. So, for example, we can measure a few things like performance, or the design of it is like pretty visible on first sight. Then we have factors like the usability or the accessibility of something. So there are similar qualities in it. But I start to think more and more about the additional layers. What are the additional layers that we can add to our digital projects? And that, in my opinion, it is totally possible to take similar levels from our physical objects. So there is also an emotional level to a certain kind. There's also like a trust layer built in, and we see this as something that is really positive to get feedback from our community after those 10 years, that longevity is becoming a thing that is a quality in a project, or that the way that we communicate or our way that we interact with the community is also becoming such a level. And then there are also emotional quality levels to it. So for example, how do people feel about this in general? And so when we had our 10th anniversary last year, we had a channel where people could give us feedback and tell us their stories from the last 10 years. And it was really cool to see that then people told us about how they switched to Kirby, and then how it improved their work life, or how they built their career on it. So there is an emotional level in that. And then there's also the secondary emotional level, how most of the times we work with freelancers and agencies, and they use it to build websites for their clients. And then their clients have emotional stories behind it. So it improves the way that they build their sites or how they can manage it. And why am I talking about this even? Because I really think that it's important to understand where the qualities the qualities are in what we are doing, because then we can focus more on them. And it's also about this definition of success, to see, okay, are we actually on the right track? Are we improving what we are doing there? And I also believe that we have to be more aware of those hidden qualities that we might not think so much about, in order to understand where we could maybe create a certain kind of advantage for ourselves in the future, because this is such a big task at the moment. Where do we stand if everything is now suddenly replaceable, obviously, because AIs can do it for us? So where is the strength in what we are doing that goes beyond what an AI could do? So I want to look into the future a bit, because when we meet here again in 10 years, and I'm really sure that Yoshi and Mark will then just do exactly the same, and it will still be 30 euros. So if we come back, I just hope that we all, through this, found more of our puzzle pieces. I think the search is super important. The search for the meaning of life, I don't think it has to be that ambitious, but more like, where is the happiness in all of this for us? To me, it got clearer than ever before, and through this talk, but also through the last years, that it's still my dream job. And this is an important realization, because it means that I actually really want to protect it, and I want to find ways to be ready for the challenges that are ahead of us. And this is a lot about those puzzle pieces, how we think of success, how we value our time, how we can be honest with ourselves, but also with others, how we accept the waves that we operate in and don't try to over-optimize ourselves, and how we redefine the quality in our work. It's about gathering confidence and focus on our biggest strength, and that's, in my opinion, our humanity. Also a great theme that has been going through the last talks, because that's the part that cannot be replicated artificially. Thank you.